Welcome to the Journal. You're not alone if you're worried about the financial meltdown. So is George Soros, my first guest, one of the world's best known and most successful investors who makes billions in times of boom or bust. He's been warning for years of a financial meltdown fueled by easy credit and sleepy regulation. Now he's out with this timely book, The New Paradigm for Financial Markets, the Credit Crisis of 2008 and What It Means. In the interest of full disclosure, you should know that I served 3 years on the board of George Soros' foundation, the Open Society Institute, dealing with such issues as a free press, the rule of law, and human rights. But I've had no involvement in his political activities and nothing to do with his business interests, unfortunately. It's good to see you again.
Good to see me.
Let's imagine for a moment that we're not in a New York studio, but we're in Neely's barbecue stand in Marshall, Texas, my hometown, and we're surrounded by people I know, people who have lost half of their 401ks in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And what they want to know is, does this financial meltdown represent the end of the American dream as they have known it?
No. I think it's got nothing to do with the American dream as such. There has been some kind of an ideological excess, namely market fundamentalism. And for the last 25 or so years. And now that world is collapsing.
What do you mean, market fundamentalism?
It's that markets will correct themselves, that you should leave it to the markets, and there is no need for government intervention in financial affairs, letting market run rampant. And that doesn't work. Markets have the ability to adjust, and they're very flexible, and there is this invisible hand. Yeah. But it is also prone to be mistaken. In other words, markets, instead of reflecting reality, they always look at reality with a bias. There's always a prevailing bias of call it, optimism, pessimism, and sometimes those moods actually can reinforce themselves, so that there are these initially self-reinforcing but eventually unsustainable and self-defeating boom-bust sequences or bubbles. And this is what has happened now. This current economic disaster is self-generated. It was generated by the market itself, by getting too cocky, using leverage too much credit, and it got excessive.
You use the word disaster.
The financial system is teetering on the edge of disaster. Hopefully it will not go over the brink, because it very rarely does. It only did in the 1930s. Since then, whenever you had a financial crisis, you were able to resolve it. This is the most serious one since the 1930s. There hasn't been one as serious as this. Unfortunately, the authorities are behind the curve. They are reacting to these crises as they emerge. One thing leads to another. One market after another gets into difficulty, and they react to it. And they don't quite understand what's hitting them, so they are not anticipating and not gaining control of the situation.
Well, this is what's interesting. Why wouldn't the government be able to look at what you looked at and see what's coming?
Because actually they have been working on false premises. This sounds very strange, but there's been this development of this belief of market fundamentalism, and particularly the idea that markets always revert to the mean, and deviations from the mean occur in a random fashion, and you can calculate it, and you get a nice distribution, and you can anticipate it, and based on that you can manage your risk. And that actually was based on a false idea. Namely, the markets are self-correcting, because the market moods have a way of affecting the fundamentals that markets are supposed to reflect. And there's always a divergence between our perception and what actually exists. For instance, take the simplest situation, namely housing. Banks give you credit based on the value of the houses, but they don't seem to somehow understand that the value of the houses can be affected by the amount of credit they are willing to give. Now, we've developed these fabulous new ways of securitizing mortgages, which has made credit much more amply available. And we've been able to calculate risk, and therefore we were willing to give more and more credit. And that has pushed up the value of the houses. Also, of course, Greenspan kept interest rates too low too long. And so you had very low interest rates, easy credit, and house prices have been appreciating at more than 10% a year for a number of years. And the willingness to lend actually increased. There was an insatiable appetite for these newfangled securities.
Yeah, which nobody understood, really.
Which they didn't properly understand. And there was always a separation between the people who generated the mortgages and packaged them and sold them to you and the people who owned them. So nobody was paying attention to the quality of the mortgages because they didn't have an interest. They collecting fees, and then there were other people holding the mortgages. Right. And that was not factored into those instruments. The idea was that by distributing risk, you actually reduce risk. But by separating the principal from the agent, you actually greatly increased the risk. And that was not reflected. And the rating agencies didn't realize it, so they gave AAA ratings. And then a few weeks later, those AAA bonds became practically valueless. And that's what has happened.
So how does a system become deranged like that, so separated from reality, like an individual who goes insane because he or she is separated?
Well, sometimes we get carried away. I mean, you know, let's say in the Middle Ages, people were religious. And so they had tremendous discussions about how many angels can dance on the eye of a needle. Now, if you believe that angels can dance, then that's a legitimate question. And this is exactly what has happened here. You thought that you could slice and dice and engage in this kind of financial engineering, and it became very, very sophisticated, and it got carried away.
What happened that we lost control?
There was a failure of regulations because they couldn't understand these new instruments. But they said, oh, well, the banks have very good risk management techniques, so we leave it to them to calculate their own risks. And you see, it wasn't only in the housing market. There were all kinds of other financial instruments. So there was not just one bubble. I describe in my book. There is the housing bubble. But this housing bubble, when that burst, that was only the detonator that exploded the bigger bubble, the super bubble, which is this 25 years of constant credit expansion, using greater and greater leverage. The amount of credit in the economy has been growing at, I don't know the exact figure, but maybe at least twice as fast as the economy itself. I think it's more like 3. And now suddenly you have a contraction of credit, and it's a sudden thing, and it's a period of great wealth destruction. And that's how these poor people in Texas suddenly find that their 401k is worthless.
So as we talk, Secretary Paulson and the government seems to be coming around to what you've been advocating, and that is taking taxpayer money, public capital, and injecting it directly into the banks. In effect, nationalizing some of these banks. Why do you think that will work when everything else has failed?
Well, unfortunately, because they are delaying it, it may not work so well, because there's a certain dynamism, and they are always behind the curve. So there are many things that they are doing now. If they had done several months ago, it would have turned things around.
This is a very gloomy assessment. You're saying that everything they're doing is coming too late? How does that ultimately play out?
No, unfortunately, that is the case. I'm quite distressed about it. I hope that eventually they'll catch up. We are determined to put the money in, not to allow the financial system to collapse. And that's the lesson we learned in the 1930s. It's an important lesson. But because we are behind the curve, the amounts get bigger and bigger. If we had understood it earlier, we could have brought it to a halt perhaps sooner. But we've got still a number of things to do. And this idea, you see, of just buying noxious instruments, off the balance sheet of the banks was a non-starter. Because
but that was the idea.
But it was a wrong idea.
But this is disturbing, George. If everything we're doing keeps accelerating the downward negative feedback and isn't working, are you suggesting, can one insinuate from what you say that we're heading for 1930?
Hopefully not. But we are heading for undoubtedly very difficult times. This is the end of an era, and this is a fact.
End of an era.
At the end of an era.
Capitalism as we have known it?
No. Hopefully capitalism will survive. But the sort of period where America could actually, for instance, run ever increasing current account deficits. We could consume, at the end, 6.5% more than we were producing. That has come to an end.
So what do we do now?
We are probably at the height of the financial crisis. I think it can't get much worse. I think it could get a bit worse yet. But then you have the fallout in the real economy.
We're in a downward spiral.
We are in a downward spiral.
How long will it go on?
Look, the one thing that my theory says is that you can't predict the future because the future depends on how you react to it. So if we do the right things, then things will be less painful. If we do the wrong things, they'll be more painful. Now, so far, we've been doing the wrong things. I very much hope that we'll have a different government in a few months, and they'll be doing the right things.
Well, don't be shy. What do you think the new government should do?
Well, first of all, you have to prevent housing prices from overshooting on the downside the way they overshot on the upside. You can't arrest the decline, but you can definitely slow it down by minimizing the number of foreclosures and readjusting the mortgages to reflect the ability of people to pay. So you have to renegotiate mortgages rather than foreclose. And you provide a government guarantee, but the loss has to be taken by those who hold the mortgages, not by the taxpayer.
You mean the homeowner doesn't take the loss, the lender?
The homeowner needs to get relief so that he pays less because he can't afford to pay it, and the value of the mortgage should not exceed the value of the house. Right now, you already have 10 million homes where you have negative equity, and before you are over, it will be more than 20 million.
You know, you're talking about taking action 3 months from now, whether it's a McCain administration or an Obama administration. What happens in these next 3 months? And I'm serious about that.
I am very worried about it, and I hope that they will have a new Secretary of the Treasury, somebody else that
sooner than later.
I don't think it would be very helpful.
You don't think Paulson is up to it?
Unfortunately, I have a negative view of his performance. Because he represents the very kind of financial engineering that has gotten us into the trouble. And that this buying off the noxious things was
buying the bad assets. That was his first idea.
Yeah, that was, and before that he wanted to create a super civ, a special investment vehicle to take care of the other special investment vehicles. That didn't fly, and they are now within a week recognizing that they have to change and inject money into the into the banks, they make up for the hole in the equity, because those banks lost money. And they can't make it up by taking their assets off their hand. You have to recognize the losses and replenish the equity.
Is that what you would do with the bailout money now,
yes,
right now?
Yes.
You would
yes.
put it where?
Into the capital of the bank, so that the capital equity can sustain at least 12 times the amount of lending. So that's an obvious thing, and every economist agrees with this. You see, what is needed now, the bank examiners know how those banks stand, and they can say how much capital they need. And they could then raise that capital from the private market, or they could turn to this new organization and get the money from there. That would dilute the shareholders. It would hurt the shareholders
of the banks.
Of the banks, which I think Paulson wanted to avoid. He didn't want to go there, but it has to be done. But then the shareholders could be offered the right to provide the new capital. If they provide the new capital, then there is no dilution. And the rights could be traded. So if they don't have the money, other people could, the private sector could put in the money. And if the private sector is not willing to do it, then the government does it.
The assumption of everything you say is that the government is going to be a big player now in the economy and in the financial markets. But what assurance do we have that the government will do a better job?
We don't. Right now they're doing a bad job. So you want to use the government as little as possible. The government should play a smaller role. In that sense, people who believe in markets, I believe in markets. I just want them to function properly. To the extent you can use the market, you should use the market. Governments are also human. They're also bound to be wrong. Moreover, they are bureaucratic, so they are slow and they are subject to political influence. So you want to use them as little as possible, but to not to use them, see, it assumes that markets are perfect, and that is a false belief.
Has the whole global system become so complex with such gargantuan forces interlocked with each other, driving it forward, that it doesn't know how to obey Adam Smith's natural laws?
No, I think our ability to govern ourselves doesn't keep pace with our ability to exercise power over nature, control over nature. So we are very complicated civilization, and we could actually destroy our civilization because of our inability to govern ourselves.
Would this all be happening if we still had a strong sense of the social compact? I mean, our social safety net has been greatly reduced. People have a real sense that the gods of capital have left little space for anyone else. People at the top don't have much empathy for people at the bottom.
Yeah, yes, because there is a common interest, and this belief that everybody pursuing his self-interest will maximize the common interest, or will take care of the common interest, is a false idea. It's a suitable idea for those who are rich, who are successful, who are powerful. It suits them to justify, enjoying the fruits without paying taxes. The idea of paying taxes is an absolute no-no, right?
Unpatriotic.
Unpatriotic. So, yes, you must have, in my opinion, you need, for instance, a tax on carbon emissions. But that is unacceptable politically. So we are going to have cap and trade. And the trading will have all kinds of loopholes and misuse of the regulations and all kinds of ways of making money without actually dealing with the problem of that it's designed to cure. So that's how the political process distorts things.
So let's think about those people down at Neely's Barbecue going home tonight having heard you. What they've heard you say is the system is really dysfunctioning right now. It's out of control. Nobody's in charge. They've heard you express your own worry that in the next 3 months it could get much, much worse. And they've heard you say that you don't see much good news immediately on the horizon. So let's leave them something to think about as they go home. Let them go home and say, Mr. Soros said, here are 3 things we can do, simply. 1?
Well, deal with the mortgage problem, reduce foreclosures, recapitalize the banks, and then work on a better world order where we work together to resolve problems that confront humanity, like global warming. And I think that dealing with global warming will require a lot of investment. You see, for the last 25 years, the world economy, the motor of the world economy that has been driving it, was consumption by the American consumer, who has been spending more than he's been saving, all right? Than he's been producing. So that motor is now switched off. It's finished. It's run out of, can't continue. You need a new motor. And we have a big problem, global warming. It requires big investment, and that could be the motor of the world economy in the years to come.
Putting more money in, building infrastructure, converting to green technology?
Instead of consuming, building electricity grid, saving on energy, or rewiring the houses, adjusting your lifestyle, where energy is got to cost more until you introduce those new things. So it will be painful, but at least we will survive and not cook.
You're talking about this being the end of an era and needing to create a whole new paradigm for the economic model of the country, of the world, right?
Yes.
Well, one of the British newspapers this morning had a headline, "Welcome to Socialism." Mm-hmm. It's not going that way, is it?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. Actually, these market fundamentalists are making the same mistake as Marx did. You see, socialism would have worked very well if the rulers had the interests of the people really at heart, but they were pursuing their self-interest. Now, in the housing market, the people who originated the houses earned a fee, and the people who then owned the mortgages, their interests were not actually looked after by the agents that were selling them the mortgages. So you have what is called an agent principle problem in socialism, and you have the same agent principle problem in this free market fundamentalism.
The agent is concerned only with his own interest.
That's right.
Not with the interest of
the people whom they're supposed to represent.
But in both socialism and capitalism, you get the rhetoric of empathy for people.
And it's a false ideology. Both Marxism and market fundamentalism are false ideologies.
Is there an ideology that
is not false?
Yeah.
I think the only one is the one that I'm proposing, namely the recognition that all our ideas, all our human constructs have a flaw in it, and perfection is not attainable, and we must engage in critical thinking and correct our mistakes.
And that's why
that's my ideology. As a child, I experienced fascism, the Nazi occupation, and then communism, 2 false ideologies. And I learned that both those ideologies are false. And now I was shocked when I found that even in a democracy, people can be misled to the extent that we've been misled in the last few years.
The book is The New Paradigm for Financial Markets, the Credit Crisis of 2008 and What It Means. George Soros, thank you for being with me on The Journal.
Pleasure.